Hello, my name is Jim Remar, President and CEO at the Cosmosphere, and I want to welcome all of you to our Onward and Upward Telethon. Today I am in Dr. Goddard's lab where we bring science to life here at the Cosmosphere. So let's use science to get things started with a bang. Joanna?
Retro. Go. Vital. Go. Guidance. Go. Control. Go. Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Ecom. Go. Surgeon. Go. Capcom, we're go for landing.
And welcome to the Cosmosphere, where we are coming to you live with our Onward and Upward Telethon. You can make any of the phones in this mission control ring by calling 620-500-5005. And here to answer your call, to hear your story, or to take your gift to the Cosmosphere are our wonderful volunteers for the day. We have board member Carissa Eisman, our public relations coordinator Carla Stanfield, board member Sally Cobble, board member Morgan Starkweather, all waiting to hear from you at 620-500-5005, or you can make a contribution today online at cosmo.org. And I'm pleased to say we've already had 2 calls in the brief delay that we had before our telethon started. And so thank you to those generous donors who've already gotten us started this afternoon. Throughout today, you're going to hear some great stories from great legends of space, but none of their stories could continue if it weren't for places like the Cosmosphere. And we have some great staff members here today who I'd like to introduce. Kelsey Genshork, Michelle McCartney, Jack Graber, Alicia Lance, Stephen Birdsall, and behind the camera, Mr. Mark Hunter. So the Cosmosphere is possible because of a great staff of people, many of whom you won't meet today, and because of support from people like you. If you've never been to the Cosmosphere, you'll find out that we start the story of space and the race to get to the moon with World War II and then the Cold War. And what do you think happened in the Cold War just 63 years ago today? It was the launch of the Sputnik, and that changed everything. Cosmosphere celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Sputnik launch with a special celebration and a unique bottle of wine. And for the first 2 callers that call in with a pledge or a gift of $1,000 or more, we will be glad to share one of these bottles of wine with each of those callers. You'll see that they're autographed by many astronauts, including Michael Collins and Walt Cunningham. So feel free to make our phones ring with any gift amount. If you make a gift of $100 or more, you'll find yourself the proud recipient of great Cosmosphere mugs that say failure is not an option. Our motto here, yours at home, I'm sure. And anyone who makes a gift of $25 or more will receive an Apollo 13 50th anniversary lanyard. We are so grateful for your support. Thank you for making the phones ring already today. We'll be glad to hear from any of you. Throughout today, you'll hear about many missions, including one that needed a special solution to save some lives in space. And following the telethon, we'll have our virtual silent auction. And included in those auction items is this beautiful piece that depicts the solution that was created to save those lives. This is a sketch that is printed on maple hardwood. That was our first $1,000 gifts, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. And signed by Ed Smiley. Ed was one of the NASA employees who helped create the solution to a problem on board what mission? If you think you know, go ahead and tell us in the comments on Facebook. We're eager to hear what you know about space history and what you love about the Cosmosphere. We couldn't make today possible if it weren't for our corporate partners. In fact, they're with us all year long at all of our events and in everything we do here. Today's first segment is brought to you by Airshare, the safe and simple way to fly. And you can find out more about them at flyAirshare.com. I also want to be sure that, hey, Michelle, have you heard about anybody who knew the answer yet? I don't want to blow it. The question again, folks, we have some answers already. What mission was the one that required a square peg, round hole solution? What was the Apollo 13? And where can you learn all about the Apollo 13? At the Cosmosphere, of course, because we're home to that amazing artifact. Here to tell you more about it and a behind the scenes look at some artifacts are Jim Lovell and Shannon Wetzel.
I'm standing in front of the Apollo 13 command module. That's right, the actual flown Apollo 13 command module from that fateful mission, NASA's greatest failure. Yes, it was a failure, but it was a historic achievement. NASA's astronauts, engineers, contractors rallied to figure out how to safely get 3 astronauts home back here on Earth. And it's those lessons that we teach here at the Cosmosphere, and hopefully ignite a spark, inspire somebody. And what could be more inspirational than this command module? I'll talk to you a little later about how it became here at the Cosmosphere and about the restoration. But first, I want to talk to you about that historic and fateful mission from April of 1970. Apollo 13 set off as the 3rd lunar mission. The objective: send 2 astronauts to the moon, explore, return safely to Earth. By all accounts, everything was going well. 3 days into the mission, during a routine stir of the cryotanks, an explosion occurred. You can see a representation of that here with this model. You can see the damaged oxygen tank, the explosion that took place that literally blew that whole panel out. When that oxygen tank exploded, it rendered this command module lifeless. The fuel cells that you see on the upper bay no longer were operational, thus unable to power the command module. Oxygen no longer being able to supply and sustain the life of 3 crew members, the 3 crew were forced to go into the lunar module. Now, the lunar module was intended to only allow 2 individuals to survive or live for up to 3 days. The consumables in there, the water, the oxygen, were only intended to allow 2 astronauts to live in those quarters. But because the command module was lifeless, they had to power down the command module, saving battery power for the return, power up the lunar module, and then the lunar module became the lifeboat. In a little bit, our curator, Shannon Wetzel, will talk to you about one of the great engineering feats and challenges from that mission: how to scrub the CO2 out of the environment of the lunar module. So we have 3 astronauts living inside the lunar module. There were 2 primary objectives. 1, how to sustain the life of the 3 astronauts, and then 2, how to get them back home safely. So as NASA worked around the clock to determine the best trajectory and path to return the astronauts home, they were also working to understand and come up with a plan of how to sustain life. Suffice it to say that NASA rose to the challenge. The engineers devised the plans, devised the return flight path, set the command module Odyssey with the lunar module Aquarius on its return home. Knowing now that they had the return flight path, they had the ability to sustain life, the biggest question was, what happened to the command module? That explosion that rocked the Odyssey, that rocked the service module, did it damage the heat shield? What would happen when the command module and the lunar module separated? What would happen when the command module and the service module separated? But more importantly, what would happen when the command module began its descent and its return to Earth, sustaining thousands of degrees of heat? No one knew. So, once the command module separated from the service module and began its return, began its descent, NASA held its breath. And for a period of time, as it re-entered the atmosphere, the command module could not communicate with Houston, with ground control. During this blackout period, it was very, very tense in mission control. As the command module re-entered, those on the ground did not know whether the 3 astronauts inside would survive or not. It was only as the film crew captured the chutes as the command module descended that they realized and knew that the crew was safe. They had done it. They had achieved something that people thought unachievable. They had taken a failure and made it a success. Those 3 astronauts returned safely to home. Upon its return, NASA took the command module and literally gutted the interior of this. They wanted to try and figure out what happened, what caused that explosion. Once they had determined it was a malfunction in the oxygen tank, NASA decided to ship the command module overseas to Paris, where it resided for over 20 years. During that period of time, the Cosmosphere had made it an objective to, at some point, someday, get Apollo 13 back to the United States, but more importantly, get it here to Hutchinson, Kansas. And so over time, the Cosmosphere began collecting pieces and parts from the interior of the Apollo 13 command module. Thousands of parts resided in the Cosmosphere's collection. When the spacecraft came, Spaceworks technicians began the tedious task of ensuring the Cosmosphere's collection would begin integrated into the spacecraft. Over the process of, in period of 2 years, the restoration took place, with the exception of one major component that had eluded the Cosmosphere for years. That was the main control panel 1. In 1996 and 97, as the Cosmosphere grew in size and expanded, it created a new Apollo-Soyuz exhibit, taking the command module it already had on display, the ASTP trainer, and putting that into the ASTP exhibit. Spaceworks technicians went in to inspect the interior of that spacecraft, and lo and behold realized that Control Panel 1 in the ASTP trainer happened to be Control Panel 1 from Apollo 13. It had been under the Cosmosphere's nose all this time. So they reintegrated that component into the capsule, and in the late 90s, it went on display, and then in 2001, it was put into this configuration, this beautiful display that you see here. And so Apollo 13, obviously a historic mission, has a special place in the heart of us here at the Cosmosphere because of all the efforts that we have taken to preserve this wonderful spacecraft, to tell the story of that historic mission, and to bring that story life to you. We are proud to call Apollo 13 ours. I'm now going to turn it over to Shannon Wetzel, our curator, and she's going to talk to you about some of the artifacts that we have in our collection related to the Apollo 13 mission that visitors often don't get to see. Shannon, over to you.
Thank you, Jim. And what a harrowing story that was. Now, Jim's standing in front of the historic command module telling you that story. I'm standing in front of our lunar module, which would have been the lifeboat for the 3 astronauts that Jim talked about. Now, as he mentioned, sustaining life became an issue as the lunar module was not meant to sustain 3 astronauts for that length of time. As they were in there, the buildup of carbon dioxide became an issue. And as you see before me, I have the CO2 scrubbers or filters, also they're referenced. And this square one would have been in the command module, and this round one would have been in the lunar module. So they had plenty of square ones for the command module, meant to sustain those 3 men for days on end. They did not have enough of the round ones to scrub that CO2 out of the air in the lunar module. So as the CO2 built up, as the problem built up, Mission Control had to figure out how to take the square one and make it so it fit the whole of the round one and was able to scrub the carbon dioxide out of the air. Hence the square peg round hole problem that you often hear about. And there are some great photos of the solution they came up with. Using only the items they had inside the lunar module, I think there was a liquid cooling garment bag and some duct tape and just regular things in there, they were able to mount it to the side of the round hole and get it to filter out that carbon dioxide, hence saving the astronauts' lives. Only 7% of the Cosmosphere's collection is on display. These are some items that were pulled out of the back room, out of the archive. So this is something that you don't get to see every day.
3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. The Saturn V building up to 7.6 million pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
This is Mission Control Houston. We appear to have a good first stage at this point.
And of course, I graduated from high school. I finished my college at the Naval Academy, and I went to sea And then when I came back, I was in the test program around 1960, I think it was, when NASA was formed, and then we're looking for astronauts for the Mercury program. And what they did was they sent inquiries to both the Navy and to the Air Force. And they're looking basically for test pilots, because they figured test pilots were the type of individual that, being in a new vehicle like Mercury, they would be able to examine the vehicle, come back with information about what has to be done and things like that. And so I got an invitation to go for a physical if I was interested in getting into the space program. And so I was very much so, because I was interested in that, you know, long before we had decided there was going to be a Mercury. And I went up to Albuquerque to the hospital up there to get a physical. And I did that along with the other candidates at that time. That was, of course, John Glenn and Alan Shepard and all those guys, and took a physical there, and I was the only guy to flunk the physical. I had a high bilirubin or something like that, and so I was very much disappointed. And I went back. I was in the test center then. I was testing the F4 Phantom at that time, and suddenly, after my period there, I went down to Oceana to the first squadron that was going to test the Navy pilots out of the new airplane. And so I heard that NASA needed more astronauts. I think they had just finished John Glenn's first flight, you know, and I can recall that. I watched it, you know, really quite had very much interest. And so I got a notice from the Navy Department, and they didn't know anything about my flunking the physical at NASA the first time. So they said, would you like to apply again for the space program? And I said, sure, why not? And I was about to tell them that I flunked the first time. So I applied the second time, and this time my physical was with the Air Force in San Antonio at their naval hospital facility there. I don't think they knew anything about a high bilirubin that I flunked the first time. And so anyway, they passed me, and I got in the program, and that's how I started my space career. Apollo 13 was an entirely different story. And you have to kind of look at that perspective to it. This was the fifth flight to the moon. Actually, the fifth flight to the moon, and the third lunar landing flight. You know, it was getting to be ho-hum. It was going to be, oh, where are they going? Are they going to, they're landing on the moon again? Oh my gosh, didn't know that. And so when the explosion occurred, it was probably the best thing that happened to NASA. Because when the explosion occurred, it occurred just at the right time to allow a successful recovery. If the explosion occurred just after we committed ourselves at the highest rate of speed to go to the moon, and then had to use the lunar module to try to get home, we'd have probably run out of consumables long before we could get home. If the explosion occurred after we had circled the moon and got into the moon's gravity, or heaven forbid, land on the moon, that would be the end of it. I mean, NASA would have to look at the 3 astronauts who are now permanent parts of the lunar surface. So it happened at the right time, and it gave us a method of getting back safely using the help of the mission control and using the lunar module's systems, not to land on the moon, but for guidance and for speeds and for consumables to get us back to the Earth safely.
The first 2 years of college, I majored in journalism. I say majored, it was toward an AA degree at a junior college, but had plans of going to the University of Missouri, which was a renowned journalism school at that time and still is. So that's where my next stop was going to be. But the Korean War had come on. And that's when I decided to enlist and serve. And my dad sort of always recommended I become an officer, a commissioned officer. And the only program that fit for my age and 2 years of college at the time was the Naval Aviation Cadet Program. So I signed up, of course, like typically of an 18-year-old, not thinking too far ahead. I had never been in an airplane in my life, not even sitting on the ground. So that was a little concerning when I got into pre-flight the first 4 months, and all these other members of my class were talking about their experience just flying light airplanes or something. And it was like some of the things they were talking about was like a foreign language. But I got smart through a pre-flight, you know, about the way the world of airplanes worked and some specifics on the airplane I was fixing to fly. But the bottom line is the first flight, I loved flying. I mean, it was just magical. First time I went up with my instructor, Hank Schmitt, in 1952. And so I just, in my mind, it immediately made a 190-degree turn and said, somehow my life is going to be involved with aviation. There was no space program, see, at that time. So that veered me off in that direction. Anyway, you also get commissioned in whatever service you've chosen, which is limited. It has to be the Navy or Marine Corps. And so I chose the Marine Corps because I knew I could get fighters or attack. It turned out how that happened, when I finished basic, you go to Corpus Christi to sign in. And you go to this office and there's just a yeoman there, an enlisted fellow. And he has a book in front of him. He flips open and he just assigns you random as you come in for what the open slots are. And he was going to assign me to seaplanes. He'd asked me, he said, are you a Navy cadet or a Marine cadet? And I said, I'm a Navy cadet. So he was going to assign me to seaplanes. So I said, where's the Marine office? So he sent me down the hall to a major, and I became a Marine cadet. So that assured I got fighter or attack. And so that's how that happened. My dad was Navy, and he was Merchant Marine for 12 years. So he was kind of wishing I'd have stayed Navy, but I didn't want to fly seaplanes. If Apollo 13 obviously has a lot of notoriety because of the nature of the failure we had and the workarounds that had to be done. But if you would look at the total Apollo program report, which is a pretty thick document, which you get by freedom of information, and there's appendices, and one of the appendices, this is long after I left NASA and had some time to thumb through that kind of stuff. One of the appendices was anomalies, which are failures of various sorts, some very minor, that are listed by mission. And if you ignore Apollo 7 and 8, which only had one spacecraft, they did not have a lunar module, so it's kind of cheating to count them. But if you look at all the vehicles, missions that had 2 spacecraft, Apollo 13 in total had the second least of anomalies. was. I say many of them were very minor, like an instrumentation. Now you might also say, well, we didn't give our command module much chance to have any more anomalies because it was out of business for 4 days. But that was the business as usual, really, on flights. We almost aborted, as you probably know, we almost aborted Apollo 14, and we almost aborted Apollo 16. So we almost had 2 more landing aborts because of problems that occurred on those flights that had to go through some machinations to figure out ways around what they were dealing with. So it was kind of the nature of our game all through our training. We trained with almost every training cycle we had, which we trained for launches or entries or on orbit or landings. A special team was in place called Sim Soup. That was probably about a dozen people. Jay Honeycutt, I think, led the group doing Apollo initially. They spent their life, they were very devious people, thinking of the right mix of failures and the right timing to make us look bad. I say us, crew and mission control. And that was for almost every sim. And so, we always knew going to sim that something bad was going to happen. We just didn't know what it was or when it was going to happen. So that was throughout our training, that was the mode of operation. So we were all pretty versatile with dealing with problems as a result.
I don't know about you, but I certainly am grateful that I don't have to overcome the problems that Fred Haise prepared for and then encountered on Apollo 13. It makes our lives seem pretty simple, doesn't it? Well, I want you to know we've been so grateful to hear the phones ring with your donations, and we'll get to that total in just a second. But we also love hearing your stories. This came from Stephen Smith in Fairfax, Virginia, and he just wanted us to know that he's a 6th grade teacher. Yay for all the teachers out there watching, who brought his wife to the Cosmosphere over their honeymoon. That is the best honeymoon trip I've ever heard of. He's visited many museums, and he said he was astonished by his experience of the Cosmosphere. He has since revisited with his children and finds the timeline and flow of the museum to tell a magnificent story. Thank you so much for sharing that, Stephen. It's that kind of impact that the Cosmosphere has that is so encouraging to all of us here to learn about firsthand. So we'll have more stories just like that with your support. Alicia, what's our total? Oh my goodness, $6,000 already, folks. That's $3,000. Thank you. Woohoo! That's $3,000 from you, and thanks to a generous gift of $75,000 that's a challenge grant for today's auction. That's $3,000 from the Patterson Family Foundation. The Patterson Family Foundation out of Kansas City graciously donated $75,000 to the Cosmosphere to match gifts up to that amount all day today in today's telethon. And in fact, you still have an opportunity to give throughout the week. We're going to leave this link up live so that you have a chance to go to the donation button on our website. You can even do it now if you want to practice. Click the donation heart in the upper right-hand corner of the cosmo.org screen, and you can donate then, or you can donate now. You'll see that that donation window comes up to be all about the telethon, and it will remain that way throughout the rest of the week. And of course, you can call and make our phones ring here at 620-500-5005, and we'll be grateful to hear from you. We're off to such a great start. Thank you. I also want to thank our corporate partner that will be sponsoring this segment of our show. That is Evergy. And Evergy is our company that provides our utilities and serves the communities throughout the region, moving communities forward. The silent auction that will begin right after this telethon has so many wonderful items in it, including this beautiful art piece, which is a photograph that's printed on brushed aluminum. And it's hard to tell in a photo of this great piece how beautiful this is, but that treatment gives it extra depth and a sheen to all of the images. As you can see, this particular photo was about the Earthrise. The first time that humans saw the Earthrise over the dark side of the moon was with what mission? If you know, let us know in our comments on Facebook. You'll be hearing from Jim Lovell about his impressions of that mission coming up right after our curator, Shannon Wetzel, takes you places you've never gotten to see before in the Cosmosphere. She's coming to us from the basement of the museum.
We're down here in the what I call the catacombs of the Cosmosphere, but really is actually the collections department and also the home of our collection, our actual collection. About 98% of our collection is stored down here in the archives. Unfortunately, this space isn't big enough to house some of our rockets that are in storage. Down here, it is climate controlled with temperature and humidity controls. We try to create an environment where our artifacts will last for a long, long time. But often you don't get to see some of the cool stuff. So we've pulled out a couple items for you to see down here in collection storage. I will start with this baseball. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's just a baseball. But this is a baseball from the 1966 World Series. It hit foul off of a pitch by Sandy Koufax. The person who got the ball decided to go to the stadium club and see if they could get Sandy Koufax to sign it. He was already gone, but the waitress pointed out 3 astronauts at a table nearby. So the person who got the ball went over to the table, and the 3 astronauts graciously signed the ball. And that turned out to be the Apollo 1 astronauts. That's Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. Now, as you'll recall, so let me think. The World Series 1966, so fall of 1966. In January of 1967, they all passed away in the fire. So just a couple months later, they were all gone. A very cool story, and so they all autographed that ball. Now, another cool artifact in our collection is this camera right here. This camera is significant because on September 11th, 2001, on the space station, this camera was used to take a picture of the smoke from Manhattan after the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. So a very cool, very harrowing story from our collection. And then also, on a lighter note, we've pulled out this TLI procedures from Apollo 8. Now, those of you who know about the Apollo 8 mission know that it was the first time that humans left Earth orbit and went to the moon. Now, they didn't land on the moon, but they did orbit the moon as well. The TLI procedures, translunar injection procedures, were used to get them out of Earth's orbit. And as you can see inside, let me open it up. There are handwritten notes inside from when the astronauts used this procedure book. So, I'm so glad you got to come down here into our collection storage for this brief little look at some of the stuff you don't always get to see.
That was my third flight, but it was something I will never forget. Going all the way there, we got into lunar orbit on still when it was still dark, and fired our engine to slow down. Moon's gravity caught us. We started to come around the moon, and just as we did that, the sun was shining on the other side, and pretty soon, the sunlight was shining on the tops of all the craters, and suddenly we started to see the far side of the moon. First time, and we were like 3 school kids looking down ancient old craters that no one else had ever seen before. And as we got around, coming around, and of course, the most magnificent part of that flight was seeing the Earth as it really is. We saw the Earth some 240,000 miles away, and it was like a little round, brilliant ball. The sun was shining, of course, on it. And it reminded me at that time of a saying that I'd heard starting as a boy. And I always used to say it, that I hope to go to heaven when I die. And I thought to myself up there, that's saying, I hope to go to heaven when I die. I went to heaven when I was born. I just thought about that. Here I am looking at a place that when I was born, that had the proper mass to have the gravity to contain water and an atmosphere, the very essentials for life. I arrived on a planet that was orbiting a star at just the right distance to provide the heating and the temperature to cause life to form on the Earth. And I thought to myself, yeah, God has really given us a platform in which to perform, and it's up to us to the way the play, turns out. So it was really quite a thing to me to see the Earth as it really is, and the fact that that was my home that far away.
And we all have a part to play on this beautiful platform God has given us. What inspiring words from a most incredible man, Captain Jim Lovell. As you can hear, mission control is hopping thanks to your calls. And what do you think that's meant to our total? Well, Alicia, can you tell us? We're up to $6,426. Thank you all so much. We have people watching from Ohio, Tennessee, Scotland, California, Wisconsin, and more. So thank you to every one of you. Be sure to share on Facebook with your friends so that they know you're watching and that they can join you. And thank you to all of you who are watching on YouTube as well. I mentioned earlier that we had a story that came in on the phones today, and do keep those coming. We love it. We also had one that came in on the comments on Facebook as we were promoting the telethon, and I just want to share with Todd Stevenson, if you're watching today. He asked, were any of the astronauts Eagle Scouts? And yes, several were. In fact, 40 astronauts were Eagle Scouts. 2 Moonwalkers were Eagle Scouts, Neil Armstrong and Charlie Duke. And Jim Lovell was also an Eagle Scout. It's also fun to note that out of all of the astronaut corps, hundreds have been involved in scouting in one form or another. And Michelle's about to put in our chat on the Facebook site the link that you can go to learn more information about the correlation between scouting and NASA and exactly what rank in scouts different astronauts rose to. At the Cosmosphere, it's not just scouts, it's Girl Scouts, 4-H'ers. They're all so important to us. Youth groups and youth organizations find here programming designed specifically for them, whether it's our scout camps in the summertime or overnights or weekend adventures. Whatever youth group you have, we can plan an outing just for them. And it involves a great challenge course, missions, all kinds of things, robots, drones, you name it, we can bring it to you at the Cosmosphere. So be sure, either let us know in the comments or get in touch with us online and we'll set something up for you. Astronaut Michael Collins was another huge advocate of youth. He still is today. And he has always wanted to make sure that youth understood that it wasn't just the astronauts that they see who are heroes, according to some, but that the heroes of a mission really included hundreds of thousands of people. And he wanted young people across the United States to be sure and know that they could have a role in space exploration, even if they weren't astronauts themselves. So it's especially appropriate that Michael Collins signed for us this lunchbox and backpack that are awesome NASA pieces, but also perfect inspiration for the young space enthusiast in your life, or perhaps a space enthusiast who's just young at heart. So be sure to watch for that and other items in our silent virtual auction, which will begin at the conclusion of this telethon. We'll hear from Michael Collins shortly today. He's going to tell us about his experience aboard the Gemini 10 as part of the next chapter of our story. And this chapter is made possible by our corporate partner, Clayworks at Disability Supports. Clayworks at Disability Supports enriches the communities they serve, and they enrich the Cosmosphere experience as well. We have a wonderful partnership with Clayworks called Cosmoworks, and you're going to learn a little bit about how you can take part in a Cosmoworks experience as part of an auction item later on in the show. First, let's hear from one of the legends of Apollo about Space Olympics. Ever heard of it? Moonwalking and walking on the moon.
We were airborne in April, and in August that year, the Olympics were going to be in Munich, Germany. So, we wanted to do something cute and funny. And so we said, well, let's do the Moon Olympics. And John and I had been practicing the broad jump and the high jump. And so, but we were running behind. And so Mission Control was pushing us along, and John said, well, Houston, we were going to do the Moon Olympics, and he started jumping like this, and I said, yeah, we're going to do, I don't know what I said, but I said, yeah, and the TV camera was on me, and it showed me bouncing, and when I sprang up, I straightened up, and so my center of gravity went backwards, and I started over backwards, and I was scrambling for my balance, but I never made it. But I did have sense enough to roll right and land on my right side, which broke my fall enough that the backpack wasn't damaged. And I remember John came over and looked down at me and said, that wasn't very smart, Charlie, and he was a little angry. And I said, I know, help me up. His balance was just fantastic. He could jump way up and come right back down, but mine, I fell over frontwards, and I'd fall. And the only time I fell over backwards that one time, but I can't tell you how many times I fell over frontwards, tripping over a rock or trying to pick up a shovel or something. So that ended the Moon Olympics. Mission Control was very upset.
My primary interest in space began when I was a Fulbright student in Norway. I happened to be out in the field listening to the shortwave radio, Voice of America, coming out of Tangier, as a matter of fact, late at night, a little after 11, when the news came on, and I heard about Sputnik being launched. It did not, it was interesting at the time, but about a month later, I was back in Oslo and had a chance to talk about this with the international student community who were in residence at the university, and they were extremely concerned. They were excited about the fact that space was starting to open up, but they were very much concerned in those days of the Cold War that the Soviet Union appeared to have a dominance in technology over the United States, who, in spite of everything that they might have said and the criticism we had, was still viewed as the protector of the free world, and was indeed the protector of the free world, and is so today. And so I became increasingly interested in the historical impact that space might have. However, I didn't really consider getting personally involved until I had completed my PhD work at Harvard and had a chance to start looking for a job, and realized that the United States Geological Survey was working for NASA on many space-related geological issues. And so I got in touch with Gene Shoemaker, who had organized the branch of astrogeology in Flagstaff, Arizona. And it turns out he was trying to get in touch with me at the same time. And we came to a meeting of the minds, and I went to work for him on space-related issues that had a geological context to them.
Gemini, the bridge between Mercury and Apollo. We walked backwards across that bridge, going from Apollo to Gemini. Gemini 10, the craft that is behind me, is in the Mullet Early Spaceflight Gallery. This gallery in my opinion, is the best gallery in the Cosmosphere, in that it is the only place in the world where you can compare and contrast a Soviet Vostok with a U.S. Mercury, a Soviet Voskhod with the Gemini spacecraft. And you can see the space race unfold before your eyes in chronological order. This gallery is filled with amazing stories, amazing feats, amazing firsts. It was the Gemini that allowed the U.S. to take the lead in the space race, a lead they would never relinquish. This Gemini 10 spacecraft, by all accounts, was a textbook mission. Actually, just 4 years ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of this spacecraft, this mission, with Michael Collins here at the Cosmosphere. It was a 4-day mission. Michael Collins conducted 2 spacewalks. They achieved all that was needed to get to the moon: a rendezvous, a docking, duration, walking in space, working in space, and then a perfect splashdown. We are one of only a few museums in the world that house the 3 early manned spacecraft, 3 flown manned spacecraft: the Mercury, Liberty Bell 7, the Gemini 10, and the Apollo 13. We are honored to be one of the few museums in the world that claim that. And it is only here in Hutchinson, Kansas, where you can see those 3 spacecrafts, but more importantly, you can learn about how we ultimately got to the moon, the challenges, the perseverance, the failures, the opportunities, all brought to you here at the Cosmosphere. Now, our curator Shannon is going to talk to you a little more about the Gemini 10, but more importantly, the pressure suit worn by Michael Collins during his 2 spacewalks during this mission. Shannon?
I'm standing next to Michael Collins' G4C spacesuit, the actual spacesuit he wore on the Gemini 10 mission. He did 2 spacewalks in this spacesuit. Now, during the Mercury program, the spacesuit was more of a backup, just in case they lost cabin pressure. During the Gemini mission, they needed a suit that they could actually wear in the harsh environment of space, and this suit fit the bill.
We interrupt our regular program so that ABC News can bring you in color this special report on the Gemini 10 mission. From ABC Space Headquarters, here is ABC correspondent Peter Jennings.
Good afternoon, everybody. Exactly 4 minutes and 6 seconds as we go to the Atlas Agena liftoff, and everything is going very smoothly as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration prepares its most ambitious manned space flight to date, Gemini 10. 2 astronauts, both 35 years old. A naval commander, John Young, an Air Force major, Michael Collins. John Young making his 2nd flight into space, having been a part of Gemini 3 with Gus Grissom. Michael Collins making not only his first flight into space, but going to make his first spacewalk in the days ahead.
Well, Gemini was very small. It was bigger than the Mercury. Those people like John Glenn, who were shoehorned into a Mercury, would probably have considered Gemini to be almost spacious. It was about pretty close to the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, 2 front seats, but with a big console in between the 2 seats. I thought it was, Gemini was a misnomer. It was, of course, named because it was a 2-seater and Gemini twins. I thought it should be named Janus, which I think he was the god of doorways. Gemini was really the link, the extremely important link between our first attempt to go into space, Mercury, and then our lunar program, Apollo. So Janus looked both ways. And when he was in his doorway, he saw the old Mercury, he saw where he had to go with a new Apollo, and then he designed this program to make the bridge from one to the other. And in that sense, Gemini was essential to landing on the moon at the end of the decade, as President Kennedy had said we should do.
The crew was scheduled to begin a sleep period. And a few moments ago, during the pass over the Hawaii tracking station, the spacecraft communicator Ed Findell out there said that the crew was resting quietly but not sleeping yet.
I was worried the first night, and it's something I had never would have ever considered. It was that without any gravity, my arms just kind of rose up like this, and there I was. There's nothing wrong with that, except like maybe 2 inches in front of these fingers, there's some switch on the instrument panel that is a big no-no to turn. So I just didn't feel comfortable drifting off. I tried to, you know, kind of move them down, but gravity would, or the lack of gravity would take them floating back. And I guess eventually I got that out of my mind and I fell asleep. It was dark when I opened the hatch opened this way. I stood up in the seat. And one of the really strange but nice things about it, it was totally un-airplane-like. In an airplane, rule number one, keep the pointy end forward. And we were turned 90 degrees, so the earth, the horizon, and everything was going by sideways, and that was such a strange direction to point and to be moving. That in itself was really arresting, but the other thing was that the stars, of course, without any interference from our atmosphere, the stars were not twinkling, but they were extra bright. And my job was to take photograph signatures of the ultraviolet and the reddish stars, and compare what I saw with my camera versus what the people on the ground were seeing, the scientists with theirs.
Mike Collins reports he has taken his first exposure, an ultraviolet picture of Beta Centauri. The crew is looking south, and Collins will attempt to photograph three stars in the Southern Cross. His primary target will be Beta Crucis. He'll also have other target stars, Alpha Crucis and Beta Centauri.
The sky was dark, black, except for the stars. Earth below curved beautifully, and the lights of the cities, you know, kind of twinkling down there. I mean, I could have stayed up for a couple of days just looking around, but we, you know, in space you always got something else you have to do, so be quiet, get back in, get the door closed, and go back to work.
Well, folks, we are a science, technology, engineering, and mathematical powerhouse at the Cosmosphere, but we had a little technical problem there, so I apologize. I will repeat everything I said that you couldn't understand unless you were reading my lips. So let's start with the stories that we've gotten from some of our callers that have just been phenomenal. Travis Hunter from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, came to Adult Space Camp, and as we were talking, I hope that Travis tells all of his friends that they can bid on a similar experience during our virtual silent auction that follows this telethon. He was here and said that he found it an exceptional time, as close to possible as being an astronaut. He loved the simulator and experience and thought that was exceptional, and he still maintains close contact with his flight team from camp, and he plans to visit the Cosmosphere to see the LB-7. So thank you for that, Travis. And Jordan Welto, who is 18, visited with his dad once, and he had come with his family on a rainy day, really wanted to see the Titan II rocket, which is a great exhibit that happens to be outdoors. So when Jordan was visiting, he said it was raining and that exhibit was closed to the public. When the rain stopped, he asked the staff to open the exhibit. They did, and he was able to see it. And he was very glad that they opened the door for him and for others to see as well. That's because we have an amazing team here at the Cosmosphere, and we're so glad to have all of them be part of this great mission. So you probably see behind me that our total is now up to more than $10,000, and we thank you all so very much for making that possible. We've been going back in time, as you may have noticed, but we're going against time. We started with the Apollo, then we went to the Gemini missions, and so next we're going to talk about Mercury. Then we're going to make a little U-turn on our timetable and come back to the shuttle missions as we spend just a little bit more time looking at space history and some of the events of the past. So we'll talk about our space transportation system and mission STS-31. If you know the objective of that mission, And what was special about it? Go ahead and tell us on Facebook, and we'll see how many of you were right. You will have a chance to bid on a beautiful piece commemorating the shuttle mission in our silent auction. In fact, there will be several different models that are signed by a variety of shuttle astronauts. We have to say the shuttle astronaut nearest and dearest to our heart is Steve Hawley, who's still actively involved with the Cosmosphere, a member of our foundation board, and signed the particular model you see here for us. It's a beautiful wooden model depicting the space shuttle. The final chapter in Looking Back is brought to you by one of our corporate partners, Dillons. Dillons is fresh for everyone, and we're grateful that they make it possible for us to continue our programming and services every day for all of you. We're going to learn coming up what it will be like, or would be like, to be the daughter of a Mercury astronaut. Can you imagine if you heard that your dad was going to be the first American in space, how you'd feel? Well, you can find out. We're also going to hear about what it was like to learn lessons from deep space and from mission control. Starting it off, we're going to hear from Flight Director Gene Kranz, who not only was great flight director during the Apollo missions, but also is going to share a story about the first time he met an astronaut from Mission Mercury.
And a guy comes in, taps me in the shoulder and says, "You're working for me now." In fact, he said it even more bluntly than that. He says, "You're all I've got. I need some help. We're getting ready to launch a Redstone, and I want you to go down to the Cape, write a countdown, write some mission rules, and when you're through, give me a call, and we'll come down and launch." And I thought, holy, this is pretty far. We have more details and more, what I'd say, investment in getting ready to fly an aircraft than this silly little rocket. And I went down the Cape. I didn't even know when I got down there. I didn't know which direction the Cape was from Patrick Air Force Base, north or south. And fortunately, Gordo Cooper was on the same airplane that was with me, and a convertible drives up. And I was wondering, what the who's got this convertible on the flight line right next to the airplane? And Cooper gets down there, and he looks up and he says, "Where are you going?" I says, "To the Cape." He says, "Hop in." And all of a sudden, we were blitzing down that ramp. We went out through the air policemen. They had real air policemen in those days at the bases. They gave him a high ball. He turns north, and we're really going. And that was my introduction to the astronaut corps and to the Project Mercury, which is really great.
Well, again, to recap very briefly for you, Air Force Captain Virgil Gus Grissom has made a successful flight into space, becoming the second American astronaut to perform that feat. He went 5,310 miles an hour. He reached an altitude of 118 miles. He landed 305 miles downrange into the Atlantic. Grissom was recovered as aboard the carrier Randolph, but the capsule has, at least for the time being, been lost.
The Liberty Bell has a special place in our heart, just like the Apollo 13 spacecraft. Again, this was the second manned craft to go up into space. It was a 15-minute suborbital. By all accounts, a textbook flight. As Grissom prepared his spacecraft in a spacesuit for recovery, the hatch, which would have been right here, was bolted into place. Now, the hatch was not open from the interior. How that hatch would open was the astronaut, in this case Gus Grissom, would have hit a plunger. That would have detonated a series of pyrotechnic bolts, and then the hatch would have jettisoned feet away from the spacecraft. As Gus prepared his craft, the hatch blew prematurely. Instantly, water began flooding the interior cabin. Grissom narrowly escaped, but as he was bobbing up and down in the ocean, his suit began to fill with water. Grissom had yet to install his neck dam, plug the ports, and so he literally started to drown. The recovery helicopter was attached up here to this point, picking the spacecraft up from out of the ocean. The pilot, noticing that Grissom was struggling for his life, cut the craft loose and went after Grissom. They successfully rescued Grissom, got him aboard the recovery helicopter, and then reattached to the spacecraft. As the recovery helicopter began to pull the spacecraft back to the recovery ship, a warning light went off in the helicopter. Wanting to get back to the ship without further incident, the recovery helicopter cut the spacecraft loose. And you can see that picture right here. The craft then sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, where it would reside for 38 years. Fast forward to the 80s, and as the Cosmosphere was in its infancy, as it was beginning to bring artifacts in to showcase the history of the space race, the Cosmosphere knew that the only available flown manned Mercury spacecraft was Liberty Bell 7. The problem, the spacecraft was at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. At this time in the 80s, the technology and the expense to try and go find and recover the spacecraft was astronomical. So, knowing that the craft was there, the challenge daunting, the Cosmosphere continued to look for ways to eventually find and recover the spacecraft. In 1999, the Discovery Channel funded an expedition led by Kurt Newport and Deep Sea Recovery Expedition team led by Oceaneering to go out and find the spacecraft. So they were looking for a very small craft. Basically, they were trying to find a needle in a haystack. How they did this was they towed a side scan sonar behind the ship so it would be back and forth, essentially like mowing the lawn. And the target, which would basically be the size of a 5-gallon bucket, would indicate where the craft was. During the course of the sonar scan, they identified 20 plus targets. So in 1999, they dropped, and lo and behold, the first target was Liberty Bell 7. So the team was ecstatic. They had found the spacecraft, done the unthinkable. So as the ROV, the underwater robot, maneuvered and clamped onto the exterior of the spacecraft to lift it up from the bottom of the ocean, and the spacecraft was deeper than the Titanic, over 16,000 feet, 3 miles. They began to pull the spacecraft up. During this point in time, the seas were very choppy. The cable broke, and the spacecraft was lost again, going back down to the Atlantic Ocean. Fortunately, they had the coordinates, went back to port, made the repairs, went back, and brought the craft back up. In July of 1999, about 38 years to date, the spacecraft was brought home. So, what happens to a spacecraft when it's resided at the bottom of the ocean for over 38 years? You bring it to the Cosmosphere, where SpaceWorks technicians, the leaders in spacecraft restoration, meticulously over the period of 6 months, restored this spacecraft. These technicians, working long hours for 6 months, literally took the entire spacecraft apart, cleaned the tiniest of components, removed all the corrosion, applied a corrosion inhibitor, and then put the spacecraft back together in the configuration that you see here. During the course of that restoration, the restoration technicians from SpaceWorks also found mementos from that flight. Inside the spacecraft were silver certificates signed by the launch crew, Mercury head dimes that Gus Grissom had brought to give as mementos after the mission. His Randall knife, survival knife, was also a part of that. In a little bit, our curator, Shannon Wetzel, is going to bring some of those artifacts out, and we'll make those available for you to see. These are as much a part of the spacecraft as the Liberty Bell behind me. Because the spacecraft has such a unique story, it really captured and captivated the country. Discovery Channel funded an expedition that would send Liberty Bell crisscrossing the country from 2000 to 2006. Today, Liberty Bell still has great recognition. It's been all over the world. It's gone over to Germany. It's been up in Indianapolis for the last 3 years, and potentially will be going to Brazil in 2021. But today, the spacecraft is here, home at the Cosmosphere, where visitors can come and enjoy it along with all the other incredible artifacts in our Hall of Space Museum. I'm going to now turn it over to Shannon Wetzel, and she'll take you behind the scenes with some of the other additional artifacts.
So, what do you need for a suborbital flight into space? Well, you're going to need a survival kit. And up here I have some items that were recovered out of Liberty Bell when it came up from the bottom of the ocean. This is a portion of the rescue beacon. There would have been more. The desalter kit. There was also some matches, a signal mirror, a whistle, and a Swiss Army knife. Now, you say a Swiss Army knife. That's probably enough. No, it is not. You need a Randall knife. This was a set of knives that were made specifically for the Mercury missions, and this is Gus Grissom's, also recovered from the spacecraft. And then some fun things you also might take with you, or what we inevitably pulled out of the spacecraft, was a souvenir silver certificate dollar. And then these are some of the dimes that Jim mentioned in his little talk. So these are just some of the things that you would need to take with you, and some of the things that we found inside the spacecraft during the restoration.
Well, we did, you know, through the years, the months of his training, we asked questions. You know, we finally kind of got the picture, what was happening. And, you know, we'd ask like, well, Daddy, what happens if the parachute doesn't open? Well, there's a backup parachute, Laura. Oh, okay, good. And my parents were very smart because they never mentioned that we should be afraid, that he might not come back, that it was a dangerous thing and nobody else had done this.
Right.
That none of those thoughts were in our house or in us. So we just knew Daddy was going to do his job just fine.
Hi, I'm Sandy Marshall, and I'm an alum of the Cosmosphere Camps, and I had the honor of sitting down with the great Gerry Griffin, former director of NASA's Johnson Space Center and legendary flight controller in Mission Control. He was the lead flight director on Apollo 12, Apollo 15, and Apollo 17, and his team played a critical role in the safe return of the astronauts on Apollo 13. He shared some incredible stories and lessons from the Apollo era, along with his advice for the next generation of space explorers. Enjoy. Gerry Griffin, it's an honor to have you with us, and thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Really appreciate it. It's an understatement to say that there's so much we can learn from your experiences on Apollo 13 and other missions. But I'd like to start this conversation at the beginning. Could you talk about some of your early teachers and mentors that might stick out, and maybe some lessons that you kept in mind?
I can remember teachers clear back to middle school for sure. And I remember one high school teacher I had and she was my favorite. Her name was Garrett, and Catherine Garrett, and she didn't teach a technology course. She taught American history. Always that keep pushing the frontier, push the frontier. That's how we opened the American West. And it was not easy. And she talked a lot about the hardness of it. And I remember I have used that as analogy because it was the same thing trying to push the frontier of space. And we've just begun, really.
What are some key pieces of advice you would have for people looking to manage change, be more agile, think on their feet, work in team environments from what you've called over, decades of this expertise, working in mission control?
Yeah, I really think that another secret to Apollo was our leadership. And I'm talking about leaders above me and leaders of other groups below me. Let me explain what I mean by that. And I think it makes a difference when you get into off-normal situations like we're in now. Leadership, we trusted up and down the line. In fact, if anything in Apollo, we tended to shove decisions down to the most capable people that had to make that decision. There's a tendency as organizations grow older, and we're seeing it in this country now, for decisions, particularly when things don't go quite right, pull them up to higher levels, as if a higher level had more capability to determine the right course of action. In Apollo, we went the other way. We left it, if we had a subsystem manager, say on the batteries, subsystem, just the batteries, we wanted that person to make the key input. We just wanted the right decision. We didn't care who made it. And I think that's important, an important thing to remember. Let me give you one quick story. I don't know whether you have time to work this in or not, but let me give you one quick story. Apollo 13. We had decided that they were on the way to the moon. Oxygen tank exploded. They were about 40 or 50,000 miles still headed for the moon. So after some initial kind of getting things stabilized, it became fairly clear that we were not going to land. We weren't going to go in an orbit around the moon. We were going to go around it and come around and head back to Earth. There were several options that we had to do that, and several different ways to do it. And Glenn Lunny's team, the black team, and my team, the gold team, were the two teams that did most of the, taking about a day, did most of the analysis, and then we came up with these options that we could do. It came time to make a decision, and Glenn and I were told to go up. We had a meeting room. Actually, we went up to the viewing room on the control center on another floor, and there was the face of NASA we were looking at. These two young guys, both of us I was 34, I think, and Glenn was 31 or 2. And we were looking into the head of the agency. I think Von Braun was there, I can't remember. Chris Kraft, all kinds of leaders from George Lowe, program manager, and others. And here are the two young guys. So we briefed them on the options. In today's environment, I think you would have had several people holding it. Well, did you think of this? And did you think of that? And why didn't you think of this? And why did you like this over that? There was a long silence. Nobody said anything. And finally, the head of the agency, Tom Paine, the NASA administrator, said, "What can we do to help you?" That was all. We said, "We think we got it, sir." And he said, "Okay, let's go." So we back to the floor of the control center, and the rest is history. It worked. My point is that nobody tried to, they knew we were in the best position to analyze all of that. And they could listen to us, and they trusted us. And that story drove home to me what good leadership really is. Listen, but don't try to decide things you are not expert in. Just don't go there. Trust the people. Build your team.
This is just, it's such an honor to get to chat with you, Gerry.
Yeah.
What's your advice for young people looking to get into space exploration, to do what they love, to follow their passions? What should they be thinking, and what should they be doing?
I think probably the most important thing for young people to think about is that there is a lot of aura and glamour to space travel and space exploration and that kind of thing. And some of that, I think some kids, young people in general, think, oh, it's too complicated for me to do. It's just, it's something I couldn't do. Well, they're wrong. Space travel, space exploration really comes back to a nuts and bolts and software and programs, and it's not something that's mysterious. It's different because the environment is different. But nobody should be afraid to, if they even have an inkling that they think they've got an interest in space, they ought to go for it.
Gerry Griffin, one of the true legends of space exploration, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm joined today in the Walter and Velma Justice Planetarium here at the Cosmosphere by former shuttle astronaut Steve Hawley. And thanks to state-of-the-art digital projection systems, we're enjoying some Hubble imagery. Steve, you're particularly familiar with Hubble. Why don't you tell us why?
Well, thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I've been blessed in my career to have been associated with Hubble Space Telescope in actually several different ways. I was lucky enough to get assigned to the mission that took Hubble to orbit. We launched in 1990, but we were actually assigned to the mission in 1985. And so we spent several years working on the development of the procedures, not only to put Hubble in orbit, but also because, you know, hopefully Hubble was going to be in orbit for a long time, and we were going to go back to service it to help work on the procedures that we wouldn't use on our mission, but other missions would use later on. And then I was lucky enough to be assigned to the second servicing mission, so I got to go back to Hubble 7 years after we launched it. And a lot of people know this, but the design of Hubble took advantage of the fact that using the space shuttle and astronauts in orbit, we could upgrade the telescope over time, putting in new instruments, replacing components that had failed. It's common for our satellites to work well after we launch them, but their onboard instrumentation does tend to become obsolete over time. And this was the first time we had the opportunity to say, can we make a telescope state-of-the-art for a long period of time? And to do that would require updating the instrumentation. And of course, that's what we did. And then after I left NASA and came back to KU as an astronomer, I actually was lucky enough to be part of a collaboration that had a successful proposal. So I actually was able to use HST in my research. So that may make me unique in the sense that maybe the only person to work on HST on the ground in orbit and then use it for research.
That's great. Steve, you've chosen half a dozen images that you felt were important to share with those joining our telethon. Why don't you talk to us about those images?
Sure. And of course, you could pick, 600 or 6,000. I picked just a few, and I did so because some of them are primarily there because they have really interesting science in them. Some of them I chose just because they're pretty to look at.
Right.
And I think that that's certainly one of the appeals of Hubble over the years has been the ability to share truly spectacular imagery with people. And so the one you see here is very iconic. That's a star-forming region, has the designation M16 or the Eagle Nebula. One of the reasons I chose it is because it was obtained by a friend of mine and one of his colleagues back in the mid-90s. I don't remember exactly when. But this is, people have made posters out of this. This is, called Pillars of Creation, and it is one of the iconic HST imagery. But what it shows is clouds of gas and dust that contain stars in the process of formation. And if you look at, some of the tips of the pillars, you can kind of convince yourself that hidden in those clouds of gas and dust are, new stars that are just beginning to form. And the reason that the cloud itself looks a little bit ratty, if you want to call it that, is because other stars have formed. They're not shown in this image, but they're nearby. And what happens once the stars become active and start fusing, they start generating energy and radiation pressure. And the radiation pressure tends to now erode the remaining gas and dust that was in the neighborhood. So you see areas here where the gas and dust has been cleaned out by the birth of stars.
Wow.
And we had a pretty good idea how star formation took place before Hubble was launched, but we've seen observational evidence that a lot of what we thought is correct, but also there's some with new observations, you have the opportunity to find new questions to address. And one of the questions, frankly, is we don't really know. If you take a gas cloud of a certain size, we know that it makes stars of different sizes.
Right.
You don't get a lot of really luminous large stars. You get a fair number of low mass, relatively low luminosity stars, but we don't know how to predict that a priori. If you have a big cloud, can you predict, okay, it's going to make 3 really luminous massive stars, and it's going to make 27 solar type stars, and it's going to make 100 red dwarfs? We don't know how to do that. And so hopefully one day our ability to predict that will be better, and that'll tell us something more in depth about how stars actually form. This is the extreme deep field. The reason I chose this is I think back to the early 90s, after we launched the first servicing mission that corrected for the mirror aberration. The director of the Institute, Bob Williams, chose to devote some time to photographing a blank part of the sky. And in fact, that was another of the key projects that was designated before Hubble was launched, was to take a deep image of just a random place of the sky. I think that the term they used back then was as a gesture to the unknown. And so what Hubble did was point at a region of the sky in the northern hemisphere under the handle of the Big Dipper. That was away from the Milky Way. And it was also away from any known clusters of galaxies. And as hard as it is to believe, back then, 25 years ago or more, we thought the sky was blank. We didn't know what we would see if we took a deep exposure. And in the original Hubble Deep Field, what we saw was something looked like this, where almost all of the objects in the image were galaxies. And for me, at least, that was astonishing. That there were so many galaxies in this region of the sky that we thought was empty. I'll explain in a second why that result is interesting, but it was so interesting that we then took even deeper exposures, and that led to the extreme deep field. We also took some exposures in the southern hemisphere, because the deep field images were rich with objects that could be studied in more detail. And specifically, if you would look at an image like this, if you find objects that are red, and in particular, if you find objects that are red that look a little ratty, they're not nice symmetrical shapes, chances are those are highly redshifted galaxies from the population of galaxies that formed first in the universe. And so the deep fields have been tremendously helpful at identifying objects to follow up with large ground-based telescopes. And so they've been tremendously valuable. And for me, at least, it was a total shock to see how many galaxies you would see in an image taken. The original deep field was an image taken over 10 days.
Those Hubble images are truly the words awe-inspiring in pictures. It's amazing to think that we, in our lifetime, are able to see the galaxies and the universe, and to think what has happened in Steve Hawley's lifetime and his professional career. So imagine what our children will see next. That's what we're going to talk about in this segment. We're going to talk a little bit about today and some of the amazing opportunities for students at the Cosmosphere. Right now, I'd like to have the opportunity to hear the phones ring in the background. You'll see all of our volunteers are just delightful, but here they sit with no one to talk to. So please give a wave, everyone, so that everyone knows that we're all friendly and just waiting to talk to you at 620-500-5005. That's 620-500-5005. Or you can donate online at cosmo.org. And this is Sputnik's birthday. As we said earlier, it's the 63rd anniversary of Sputnik. And so we are launching today the National Celebration of Space Week. So we will keep the telethon page up on our donation site throughout Space Week. So all contributions through the next week will go to the telethon total and will be matched up to $75,000 by the Patterson Family Foundation. And then, of course, Space Week is also the launch of our virtual silent auction, which will continue until October 18th. And you will have the opportunity to bid on all kinds of amazing things, including one that we'll tell you about in just a minute. First, let's find out what our total is. Alicia, oh, thank you, phone. We're up to $12,934. Let's see if we can get up to 15 folks in the next segment. Wouldn't that be great? 620-500. No, 620-500-5005. You would think I'd have that down by now, wouldn't you? Or donate online at cosmo.org. I want to share just a few more quick stories. Carol McGreary says, our young daughter really enjoyed the program with Michael Collins. That was at the 50th anniversary of Gemini 10. She said, with Michael Collins and with his beautiful daughters. He spoke to and welcomed questions from the children in attendance. That's because Michael Collins loves children and inspiring them. We're so grateful that he spent time with us at the Cosmosphere. Crosby Branham from Wichita, Kansas says, I hope my children get the opportunity to attend camp at the Cosmosphere to develop their love of space as I did. Crosby, I couldn't have asked for a better segue than that to bring in Nathan Meyer. Nathan is our Vice President of Education at the Cosmosphere, and he's going to tell us a little bit about camp. And this room is not set up like this just for a telethon, Nathan. So tell us a little bit about how this room is used at camp and what all the camp experiences entail.
Sure. Thanks, Mimi. So this is our mission control room, which is a very incredible backdrop for a fundraiser like we're doing here, but that's not what its sole purpose is. Every year we bring in 1,000 campers from all across the country that experience our Cosmosphere camps. At the end of our overnight camps, they all get a chance to participate in what we call our Australies mission. So this year, brand new, is an Australies capsule. We recreated the Orion capsule based on the Orion capsule from NASA, but we use that right in our simulation. So at the end of that camp, we'll bring in groups of 15 astronauts. 5 of them will sit in mission control and run the operations from here. 5 of them will get to go into our capsule and be astronauts there. And then we also have a brand new module based on the International Space Station. So we have a 4-hour mission in groups of 15, and they get to experience everything that they've been working toward throughout the week. It's really the culminating event, and when we hear years after, that's what people remember about the camps.
I think it is always exciting to be walking through the Education Rotunda at the end of a mission and hear the cheering and the hollering as the crew comes out of the capsule, because it feels so very real to them. And you can see some of the images from the camp experience on the screen behind us. But it's not just that space camp experience, if you will. We not only have missions that are capsule based, but there's so much more. So tell us a little bit about who might find our camps appealing and a little bit about the profile of a camper so any students watching can see themselves here.
Sure. Yeah, I would say the the overall profile of a camper is a curious kid. It doesn't have to be somebody that wants to be an astronaut, although that's a great place to start. Our camps are really based on all types of science and technology and engineering, the hands-on activities, the physical things that we do throughout camp. We have astronaut simulators, including our multi-axis trainer and our 4G centrifuge. So it's not just sit around and talk and have fun. It's very intense. And on mission day, like Mimi said, it's not just the fun culminating event. It's an intense day. The mission process is about 4 hours long, and you can't really fail, but nobody wants to mess up, and it's pretty intense, and they work all week to be excited about that. So our campers come from all over the country. We have day camps that start for third graders. Around middle school, our camps start to go overnight, and then we have overnight camps that go all the way through graduating from high school. So from about third grade to 12th grade, we have about 12 different sessions that people can sign up for.
It's just so fun during the summer. This summer, we only had 1 month of camp, so it was a little bit different than normal, which was hard for the kiddos and their families who had hoped to come to camp, and hard on the Cosmosphere as well. But oh my goodness, the students who were here had a great time. They learned to fly drones, they programmed robots, they launched rockets that they'd made themselves. And didn't they create the nose cones on 3D printers? There's so much to learn here, and I just love it. And I know you had told me too that a lot of the content of camp changed, including some things that you call soft skills. So speak to that just a little bit.
Sure. So this year we went through a real big overhaul. We've planned a year out before this past summer. The coronavirus was definitely a roadblock in our whole plans, but we continued on with what we accomplished. So we wanted to redesign the camp. Our camps have been going on for 30 years, and it was time to give them a freshening up. So instead of just making it a space-based camp, we wanted to give people an opportunity that may be interested in a lot of different things. So as Mimi said, they were programming robots. They were building and printing 3D printed rockets. We launched weather balloons that our best one, I think, went to about 90,000 feet. And we were learning audio, video, and the soft skills that go along with documenting everything that's going on in an experience like this. So the career pathways is really where we started to focus it. Instead of just being an astronaut-based camp, we wanted everyone to understand there's a lot that goes on to it. So the activities were brand new. This past year, we had a great group, about half of what we would have expected, but everything was going well, and we're already planning and ready to launch our registration for the summer of 2021, where all things COVID going away, we expect to be right back where we were with 10 weeks of camp and hope to have over 1,000 campers.
Awesome. And I also understand that our education team is really beefing up the adult camp experience. And a lot of those things you mentioned might be a part of it, plus more. We have that challenge course that's brand new across the street for team building and all those things. Will those be a part of adult camp?
Sure, they will. So, and not just adult camp, but that's definitely one of our new offerings. What we decided, that we spent so much time with our camp infrastructure that we decided to make it year-round possibility. So we have a lot of adults, friends, bachelorette or bachelor parties, or just groups that want to come, asked if they can do the camp experience, and we never really had an easy way to do that, but we do now. But the same would go for a family. If a family or a family reunion or several families wants to get together, we offer the same type of experience over the weekend. So they'll get to run one of our missions. They'll get to do the simulators. We do have a challenge course, a low ropes challenge course. They'll get to do some of those STEM-based activities that we do in camp. It's just compressed into a shorter weekend. So you don't necessarily have to wait until the summer. We work with people about every weekend right now. It's a bit of a first come, first serve, because on the weekends we'll bring our scout programs in, our, as Mimi said earlier, our 4-H and Christian-based groups. Our family and adult camps all happen on the weekends, but as long as there's space, we're geared up to be able to service people year round.
as long as there's space.
Oh, I didn't even mean that was good, though.
You're
I didn't
so
mean
funny.
Yeah.
Well, and it was also a perfect intro to one of our auction items, which you'll be able to bid on in the virtual silent auction immediately following the telethon. And that is, oh, thank you for that call. That is an adult astronaut experience. You need to get 13 of your friends together. And as Nathan said, it's 2 nights, but those 2 nights are going to be spent in the most amazing place, the Yagi Plantation, just outside of Hutchinson, a gorgeous farmhouse in an idyllic setting, and easily accommodates up to 15 people in absolutely the lap of luxury. So you'll have a great time in Hutchinson. We have lots of great things for you to learn, see, and do, and you can find out all about it when those auction items go live immediately following the telethon. And we've had a few questions about that. Our auction is divided into 3 different sections. The auction is going to run for 14 days, and you will get to see all of the items, but bidding won't open until appropriate. And you'll get to see all of that when you get to the site after the telethon. But first, give us a call at 620-500-5005 or online at cosmo.org. None of our camp experience would be possible if it weren't for corporate partners like the KU School of Engineering. And of course, the KU School is the flagship university in Kansas. And personally, I want to give a shout out to the School of Journalism, because KU School of Journalism can produce individuals who might find their way to a famous science center. So let's hear it for KU. Speaking of corporations, corporations can also take advantage of our team building activities, because we have great new leadership, communication, and team building at the root of all of our corporate training activities that we're rolling out this year. It's great for any size group. We not only have a mission that those companies can be involved in, or anyone. You can have an organization, another nonprofit, we're happy to serve you, but you'll run a mission, and you'll also have a chance to learn firsthand about some of the lessons that were learned from Mission Control about the importance of clear communication, listening, and teamwork. So there is literally something for everybody at the Cosmosphere. Next, we're going to hear from our favorite group of people who happen to be our Cosmosphere Camp alums. And we couldn't be what we are today without those people who have continued to love and support our camps throughout the year. So they're going to tell you a little bit about the work that they're doing in the current private sector to support space exploration. But first, we're going to hear from Gene Kranz, who's going to give us a little insight into the inspiration behind pursuing your dreams.
I've sent you a copy of what we call the Foundations of Mission Control. And the foundations represent the values. It is a clear statement of who we are, what we believe in, and when the chips are down, what we will stand for. And it's interesting that Foundations of Mission Control, Pete Frank, one of my flight directors, wrote, basically at the completion of the Apollo program, we got together with Bob McCall, the space artist, and we had him design an emblem. And there were 4 stars in that emblem: discipline, morale, tough, and competent. It represented times when we were not good enough for the work that we were trying to do. We had failed. And therefore, we wrote that word so we would never fail again. And we expanded that to several other elements that describe the qualities, the values we have to stand for in our work. And there is one that we added at the bottom, to always be aware that suddenly and unexpectedly, you may find yourself in a role where your performance has ultimate consequences. And this is very tough for all the young people to accept, because they're always looking for, there's somebody I can pass the buck to, there's a boss that's over me running on the line. And I would talk with them and say, you know, you may be driving home and you see a car accident. Are you going to get out of that car? You're going to stop. You're going to go and render aid. You're going to do the best of your ability to basically resolve that accident. If a person's involved, save that person, get them out. So this is an awareness that situations will occur throughout your life that are going to demand an ultimate commitment to resolve, to take action, to not be a bystander, but to be a performer in resolving an issue. And this is a statement in the foundations that really applies every day. And I think that when you're young, and for the young people you have in your audience, you have to establish this dream. It has to be completely focused. It has to be almost overwhelming. And as you take each step to achieve that dream, you're never satisfied because you have to move that dream further out. It always has to be just beyond your grasp. So you're always challenging yourself to be the best. And when the time comes, when you feel it's impossible, that is the time that you really get to the point of saying, am I going to quit or am I going to move on? I will find the strength in myself or someone else, or someone give me some help there, or go to a Cosmosphere and learn and see this dream all come alive there. So it's dream, aim high, and never surrender, I think is a key message to the young people in your audience.
Well, I think, of course, the history of the space program up to the spot, especially up through Apollo, is well known and digested, and the American public, I think, are very proud of what the program has done so far, especially opening up the heavens to do things besides just going around the Earth and Earth orbit, but looking at going towards other events, and the way private sector has taken the challenge to build their own systems. We were unique in doing this. And I thought to myself, when they first started to go in the private sector, I said, now, wait a second. Now, in a private sector, a company has to get together and have a product like a spacecraft or a rocket or the both, and they have to figure out all the problems with it. They have to get together. They have to get a company together. They have to have investors that want to put money to this whole thing, and then after they do all that and they're successful, they have to make a profit out of it. I mean, NASA doesn't have to make a profit. I mean, this is a government project. The profit is the success of, exploring the moon or going around the Earth. But yeah, I guess I was wrong, because private sector is still in business and doing quite a good job.
Hi, my name is Sandy Marshall, and I'm a film and TV actor, business speaker, and I produce a show called Reach, a space podcast for kids. When I was growing up in the Midwest, I was really lucky to have the chance to attend the Cosmosphere camps in Hutchinson, Kansas, and later work at the Cosmosphere for a few summers as a counselor. I was always fascinated with space and astronomy from a very young age. I've also had an interest in media and communications, and it wasn't until my time at the Cosmosphere that I learned there are a lot of ways you can get involved in space exploration, including, in my case, telling stories about what everybody from young learners to business professionals can learn from the legends of the space program and the future explorers of tomorrow. I do have one Cosmosphere story to share. A while back, I was lucky to work as an actor in a Ron Howard movie alongside Vince Vaughn and Ron's brother Clint Howard. One day we were all on a break and I said, Ron, I got to ask you about Apollo 13 because it's not only one of my favorite movies, but I was working at the Cosmosphere as a counselor at their summer camp when SpaceWorks was building set pieces. And he mentioned, the moment I mentioned the Cosmosphere, the conversation completely changed. And Ron said, man, I love the Cosmosphere. I love working with them and they help make the movie so real. And he said, I've made a lot of movies and a lot of them are on TV, but every time I come across Apollo 13, I watch it all the way through. I thought that was pretty cool. And with that, let's hand it to some fellow alums from the Cosmosphere camps who are working in some pretty cool areas of the space industry to share their memories of this great institution.
All right, yeah, so I'm Charlie Garcia. Previously, I've worked at SpaceX, but currently I'm working at a company called Agile Space Industries, where we use additive manufacturing of exotic materials like niobium and nickel superalloys to make rocket engines that nobody's ever even dreamed of before. And these rocket engines are flying on all kinds of cool missions, like next generation Department of Defense satellites and some of the next generation of uncrewed lunar landers going to the moon. My experience at the Cosmosphere is one of the earliest memories I have. I remember my grandfather holding me up in front of the SR-71 Blackbird as a small child so I could poke the very tip of it. And that stuck with me my entire life. I've known since I was just knee-high that I wanted to work in the space industry and work in this field where we all share this passion to explore space. And the Cosmosphere was such a critical part of that. I went to space camp every year I could, starting back at second grade when I was crawling around a little moon base. And since then, I've been to every other camp, and then I became a camp counselor. And I even did my Eagle Scout project at the Cosmosphere. And the Cosmosphere was so essential to setting me up for success later in life. I'm so grateful the CEO of the Cosmosphere actually wrote one of my letters of recommendation to get me into MIT, where I would later go to college. Something that's so important to working in this industry is passion, because there are a lot of very difficult challenges in the space industry, and you're going to have to learn some very hard material if you want to work on the technical side. And even if you want to work supporting the space industry from another direction other than from the engineering side, you still have, decades of accumulated knowledge and things to know that you have to be up to speed on. So I think if you can be passionate about what you do, it makes it, it maybe even makes it feasible, let alone easier, to put forward the energy necessary to learn and work on all of this. And it also means that you're never actually working. You enjoy what you do. And so I've said this to a lot of people, and this is advice that goes beyond the space industry. I don't want to say that it's follow your passion, but I would say cultivate a passion for what you do. Choose to be excited about what you work on every day. When you work on something that is groundbreaking or cool or innovative or challenging, take a moment to show your enthusiasm and excitement for what you've just accomplished, and that will build a self-reinforcing cycle of passion for your work. I've worked in places like Boston, the Space Coast of Florida, and Los Angeles. And one of the reasons I'm excited to finally be back kind of in the Midwest is now I'm so much closer to the Cosmosphere that I can visit and take place in opportunities like this. So the Cosmosphere has been such a critical part of my life to this point in time, and I'm just so grateful that they invited me to be a part of this as well. So once again, thank you to the Cosmosphere, and off to you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. My name is Michael Staub. I'm currently a fault management and system autonomy engineer for lunar missions at Northrop Grumman Corporation, supporting the Lunar Gateway and the Lunar Lander systems as part of the Artemis mission going to the moon. Previously, I have been a fault protection and systems engineer at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, supporting Earth missions, Mars missions. I was a flight director for the Mars Exploration Lunar Opportunity. I was a flight controller for the Cassini mission, so I've had my hands kind of involved in a little bit of everything from the robotic and now the human side of space exploration. I have been affiliated with the Cosmosphere for their part of probably 25 some years. Grew up in Wichita, Kansas, just about an hour to the southeast of Hutchinson. Made many trips there for school visits. Was a camper for 3 summers. Was a counselor for 2 summers. So I've been with the Cosmosphere for quite a long time. And you know, for someone who was interested in space from an early age, having a location like that was just within an hour's drive of home, and you know, really tells. I don't think any other museum in the world, you know, having that connection, you know, kind of really helps solidify that, you know, this is definitely a place it's definitely an industry that I'm working, and it definitely is really something for me that's I really just find so much joy out of it, with the idea of just exploring the solar system, exploring the universe, simply for the sake of asking fundamental questions about the nature of the universe. You know, for someone who's very young, a place like Cosmosphere, having that inspiration, having it right there was so important for me. That's, you know, kind of one of the reasons why I'm kind of here, is because, you know, I had that inspiration early on, and you know, it just kind of had it as I was growing up, and you know, it just kind of continually reinforced, you know, why I love this industry, why I love this job, and why I love working in the space industry. When I was growing up, I was heavily involved in the robotics, in the rockets kind of thing. I just kind of sought this out at school, but kind of did it more on my own. NASA has a great education program, has great education sites that offer a lot of great activities that you know, kids all the way from elementary to middle school, high school can be involved in, that teaches some of those concepts about rocketry and orbital mechanics and robotics, and you know, how those technologies are important for exploring the solar system and exploring the universe. And so above all, want to extend my gratitude to the Cosmosphere. This is an amazing place. It inspires so many people and drives a lot of us to want to not just, you know, maybe experience the camps or that place just for a couple years as students, is to actually want to be a part of that industry and push those boundaries. And whether that's being an engineer, whether that's being a scientist, whether that's being an astronomer, whether that's being an astronaut, there are many ways that you can be involved in this industry, and the Cosmosphere for me was that stepping stone. So I cannot thank this place enough. It is an amazing place. It is an incredible place. You should absolutely support it. And you know, give that opportunity that I had when I was younger to experience, you know, the joys of those camps and the fascination that I had with learning about spaceflight history, and what propelled me to go into this industry that I love so very much. And I want to pass it off to my good friend, former counselor and now astronaut trainer down at the Johnson Space Center.
Oh, the Cosmosphere has been like such a foundational part of my life that I honestly can't think of a time when it wasn't really a big piece of me. So this is a really crazy story. Hopefully we have time for this. So I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska, and I was always fascinated in space from a very, very young age. I just loved it. And I told my parents when I was about 7 years old that I was going to work for NASA and I was going to live in Houston, and you know, if they wanted to see me, they were going to have to come to Texas. So my mom and I were shopping one really cold December day, and we happened to walk by this jewelry shop. And in this jewelry, it was a really fancy jewelry store, and it just so happened that General Tom Stafford was signing autographs for the Omega Watch Company at some like wine and cheese event they were having that day. And he was there because, as you know, the Omega Watch was what the crew members wore on the moon. There's a huge one in the lobby of the Cosmosphere. That's one of my favorite exhibits. But anyway, he was signing autographs. And so I just begged. I was like, Mom, please, can we go? And she was like, fine. So we waited in line. We got to the front. And my mom has always been a very social person. So she was just like, hey, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk to him about my daughter's interest in spaceflight. So he actually was signing the autograph for me, and he said, you know, you should take your daughter to this place called the Cosmosphere. It's in Kansas. It's not that far away. I was only 11 at the time, and my mom was not sending me to Florida to space camp. It was just not happening. So she decided that she would look into it. And so he signed the picture. He said, really, they've got a great program. They're very well-oriented with the space program, but they're great with kids. And so he signed this picture. So this picture, I wish I had it to show you, but it is on my desk at NASA to this day. It's still there. So I went to camp when I begged and pleaded like the whole way home, can we go to camp, please? So I went to every camp that I could ever go to, starting when I was about 11 years old. And then once I was in college, I came back to the Cosmosphere and I worked as a counselor for the summer camps. I loved it so much that I just wanted to be there all the time. And I interned at the Cosmosphere my senior year in college, and then I actually was a full-time staff member after I graduated from college for 5 years at the Cosmosphere. So I feel like I've done pretty much every single role. It's funny, Mike and Charlie, that are also here, they were my campers when I was working at the Cosmosphere. I have very distinct memories of both of them. So it's fun. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the gist of what I've done at the Cosmosphere. Almost everything is maybe the answer, except for the IMAX. I never did the IMAX. I think one of the most important things that I learned at the Cosmosphere was that you have to find something that you really enjoy. I met astronaut Clay Anderson when I was in college, and he told me, don't always think that you have to get a certain job. You don't have to be an engineer to work for NASA. You don't have to be a scientist. You know, we have, of course, all of those people, but he said, you need to find what you love and do it better than anybody else. I feel very fortunate. I feel fortunate to have had the experience at the Cosmosphere. I'm very fortunate that my mom and my dad were so supportive of this like crazy kid who thinks that she wants to go work for NASA. You know, like I don't think a lot of like 7-year-olds say that to their parents. I know I have 3 kids and none of them have ever said that to me. So, and I feel very fortunate that people at the Cosmosphere were always so supportive. I can't even fathom where my career would be without the Cos. It's just, it's an amazing place. It really nurtured a lot of my interests. And I will tell you that I'm not the only one. There's a lot of us out there that went on to do great things, not just at NASA, but a lot of people went on to do great things, and they credit the Cosmosphere for that.
Thank you, Teresa. We could not ask for better advocates than our former campers and camp counselors and camp directors. In fact, one of them called and left us with this story. Samantha Rose from Elmhurst, Illinois said, my memory is working every summer to achieve the position of Capcom at Space Camp. I finally advanced to it my last summer of camp. So congratulations, Samantha. Way to set a goal and work toward it. As we continue to think about the present, some of you may be wishing for better days. This hasn't been an easy year for all of us. And at the Cosmosphere, while 2020 has not been easy from a revenue perspective or from strategic planning, we've taken a page out of the history that we preserve here. And we are taking some of that adversity and converting challenges to opportunities. For example, each week, our education team works to have live streaming sessions with schools across Kansas and hopefully soon across the United States and around the world. We're providing experiences that students used to have in person here that they can't this year because there are no field trips, because of course we're all still struggling with the effects of a pandemic. We also are working to create all kinds of other virtual programming. We're teaching teachers how to teach more effectively using virtual tools. We're taking some of the interviews that you've heard today and repurposing them to teach history. And of course, you're just hearing minutes of hours worth of interviews. History and leadership and improved communication. So all of this is happening because we found ourselves in a situation we didn't expect. While that situation did create a shortfall in cash of $400,000, today, with events like this telethon and the donations of wonderful people, we are able to rise to meet that challenge. So Alicia, tell me, how are we doing now? Oh my goodness, we're almost to $15,000. $14,384. That means you today have contributed $7,192. And thanks again to that generous grant from the Patterson Family Foundation. They are matching dollar per dollar any gifts made today and through the next week up to $75,000. Now through the next week, you can donate online at cosmo.org. Look for the Donate Now button in the upper right-hand corner. You'll find it in many places on our website. And of course, you can call right now and make all these phones ring at 620-500-5005. That's 620-500-5005. We are grateful for every phone call. When President Kennedy in 1961 challenged our nation to be the first to the moon and to do it before the end of the decade, that wasn't an easy time in which to live either. At the time, we just had a 39% success rate for our launches. So in other words, our space program was virtually failing. We went from fiery failures to walking on the moon in less than 10 years. It's incredible what we can accomplish when we work together. I think that's a lesson we need to remember today. Before we head on to our next segment, I'd like to thank our Cosmosphere corporate partners for making the success of the Cosmosphere possible every day. RCB Bank is our supporting partner for this segment. RCB Bank, that's my bank. And we'd also like to thank Omega Corporation. They're a corporate member of the Cosmosphere. And since 1962, Omega, just as Teresa said, has been on hand quite literally for every astronaut adventure in space. You can have a chance to win an Omega Moonwatch in our silent auction. Actually, you'll have to bid to win it. We had a raffle earlier this summer, and we succeeded in raising more than $6,000, and we did have a lucky winner in England who won that Omega watch. This is an identical model, the Moonwatch, and it's an Omega Speedmaster, absolutely beautiful. So watch for that in the virtual auction, which will start immediately at the close of this telethon online. You can reserve a spot now, and that way you will be notified of any bids on any items you're interested in. It's such an easy way to bid, to support the Cosmosphere, and to possibly have some amazing space memorabilia and other great items for your home. Now we're going to take one more chance to listen to some of the legends from the Apollo era, to hear why they believe the Cosmosphere is worth your support.
Now, I didn't know the lady by first name. I looked her up. It was Mrs. Carey. And it was interesting. She told us the story of the Cosmosphere, but she made a statement that she said she wanted to find some other option for the children in Kansas other than the future farmers of America. And she wanted to get them into engineering and science and mathematics. I think she was the first of the real proponents of STEM. You know, it's amazing how far that theme is carried. And the one thing that I found about the Cosmosphere, it is focused. It is the only museum, I think, in the world that has a singular focus on space. And space is where the energy for the future is. That is where you're going to inspire the young people to come in and pick up the studies and really get with it. You're going to find the middle generation who needs to be restored, and they can go in and they can find the answers. I was really surprised when I first got there to see the relationships that had been established between the United States program, Soviet Union, and some of the original work that the Germans were doing in there. I mean, this was a total focus upon an objective. And I think the key thing is, in life, you need that kind of a focus on objective. I'm for going back to the moon first class. I've never changed that. That is where I think we must focus our goals in space now, because we have to learn to go back into a difficult environment, learn to live that environment, and then move beyond that. But first, we must go back to the moon. And I think we're going to find that impetus, that motion to get back going again in places like the Cosmosphere. The Cosmosphere, we've been there probably about a half dozen times. Every time for the Apollo 13 reunion, I did a couple of talks there. Even before Apollo 13 came out, I've been there with a military group, a special forces group that we have, 519th. It is the place for space. Because you're not confused. A lot of museums mix in space with aviation, with this, but you have a focus, and that's what's necessary.
From the first time I went there, I could tell there was something special when I walked in. Every time I walk in there, I feel kind of like I'm back home, almost like being in the control center. It's comfortable and it feels right. Besides, every time I walk into the hall there, and particularly walk through the whole history passage and all of that, going all the way back to when, not all the way back, very little before I got there. Most of it was in my lifetime. And so every time I walk back in there, and then I wind up at the command module on 13, I feel like, golly, what a life and what an experience. And to relive it the way it's been done there is excellent. And then I get out and see airplanes and SR-71s and all of that. It just all comes together, and talk with the people. The other thing a lot of people probably don't know, it is the terrific capability you have to restore space artifacts there. Particularly, very important to the restoration of mission control in Houston, because all of those consoles were reworked at the Cosmosphere. Turned out beautifully. I mean, they matched everything just like it was. When I walked into the restored mission control the first time in Houston, I walked in and it felt just like nothing's changed. It's like it was when we walked out of there on Apollo 17 that day. Gene Kranz told me that when he walked in, first thing he did, and he said he hardly thought about it. He took off his coat and hung it up on the coat rack that they had there where we always hung our jackets, the sports coat. And he said he hung it up for you and really thought about it. And so that tells you what restoration can do, and particularly from a historical standpoint and a teaching standpoint. And the Cosmosphere does that better than anybody. I think they can do that in a way that is very, very, very unique. And then I'll finally come back to where I mentioned earlier, the people. The people at the Cosmosphere are dedicated. You can tell, I've been to places all over the world, really. There's something about that feeling that you get that the people are really interested in. You see all the kids coming in, and There's something that is different. And I love it. I love that atmosphere.
Well, of course, I'm sort of, prominent and really like the Cosmosphere. Probably was one of the best space museums that I think of, because Apollo 13 is there naturally. But even before it got there, I've heard about it and how it got started, and so admired that the way it grew and the artifacts that it had in it, and also it's in the middle of the country, and so any place that I wanted Apollo 13 to be would be where people going from New York to Los Angeles, and they got lost in Arkansas, and find on their way on the Cosmosphere that this would be a good spot for them to, to rest for a while.
I've always said that, one of the things that's unique about the Cosmosphere is its collection of space artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe that's not literally unique, because the Air and Space Museum
Sure.
also has a nice collection of artifacts. But I think what makes the Cosmosphere unique is that, unlike the Air and Space
Mm-hmm.
Museum, and probably unlike any other space museum around, the Cosmosphere tells the story of the development of spaceflight, and it talks about the separate paths between the Russian development and the U.S. development. And I think that, in terms of being educational, that is important.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to the Air and Space Museum many times.
Right.
It's great. They got lots of wonderful exhibits, but they don't really tell you the story.
Right.
And what the Cosmosphere does is inform, educate, and inspire.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that makes the Cosmosphere unique is that it isn't just a space museum that tells a story.
Right.
It's a space museum that tells a story with the intent to motivate and educate students who may grow up to be tomorrow's leaders in science and technology. And even if they aren't leaders in science and technology, they're going to be scientifically literate. They're going to understand how science works. They're going to understand how discoveries are made. And I think that is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
What I think we're doing is creating a scientifically literate population based on our collection of not only artifacts, but the stories that go with them, and how people in the past worked to develop the technologies that we recognize today.
I just want to, again, encourage people to support the Cosmosphere. It is one of the more outstanding, it probably is the outstanding museum in the United States for space and air related issues. And it's something that you can do to really benefit future generations. These museums will continue to be around for a long time, well past our time. And they do, in fact, contain the dreams and the heritage of hundreds of thousands of people, and what they have tried to do and, in fact, accomplished in space as well as in aeronautics. So I encourage people to support you. I hope it goes very, very well. And I look forward to being there in person, not too distant future.
I think it's one of the museums in the United States that is one of the most authentic collections and authentic viewpoint about space. They have, you're world renowned, the Cosmosphere is world renowned for making replicas of all of the spacecraft. They're involved in the restoration of the Gus Grissom's Liberty. They've recovered Saturn V engines. I think there are 5 that have been under restoration there at the museum, and you've got some of the most talented Cosmospheres, not only an exhibit that's fantastic, but then the restoration and the ability to replicate a spacecraft accurately is unknown in anybody. I think in anybody else in the world. Cosmosphere is at the top of the list. So I'd hate to see that evaporate. So we want to help, and we're able to do that personally. And hopefully we can motivate those of you who are looking at this telethon, a video, or whatever we want to call it, that you'll get involved too, because it's well worth it. And it has motivated a lot of kids and a lot of folks to look to the stars and to dream big. So help them out, everybody.
And your support does truly make a difference here. Everything we are is because of donors just like you. So we're just minutes away from launching our virtual auction, and you can go to cosmo.org to find that auction site. You can also go to cosmo.org, COSMO.org, to make a contribution, or you can make the rest of our phones ring at 620-500-5005. That's 620-500-5005. Please call and make a contribution. We're in the last segment of our telethon. And remember that dollar for dollar, all gifts will be matched up to $75,000. You can continue to encourage your friends to make donations online throughout the week as well. So we've heard tonight about the months of preparation that went into every space flight. We've heard about simulators and practice and mathematics to create trajectory. But there was a time when even all of that preparation couldn't keep Mission Control from being surprised. Astronauts on Apollo 8 shared a message on Christmas Eve, 1968, that no one was expecting. And it said it was one of the most profound moments for those in Mission Control who heard it, as well as those listening around the world. And I'm going to interrupt myself and say, speaking of profound, we had two callers who were young students who shared something about the Cosmosphere. And before I go back too much farther to 1968, I want to leave you with these thoughts from young people who were just at the Cosmosphere. This is from Corbin and Hadley Starkweather. And they said, Hadley's 8. I like the Cosmosphere because there are lots of cool things to do. You can learn about astronauts and galaxies and watch cool movies. We haven't even talked about our theaters tonight. I think the Cosmosphere is really cool, and I loved Space Camp. And that was Corbin, age 11. And again, that's why we're doing what we're doing tonight, is to preserve this place for young people just like that. You know, today in 2020, it is much like it was in 1968 when Apollo 8 was the first spacecraft to leave Earth's orbit and orbit the moon. We find ourselves fatigued, worried, defensive, and divided, just as the country did then. This next segment is for each of you, from all of us at the Cosmosphere and from the crew of Apollo 8. I want to thank everyone who made this telethon possible. I want to thank each of you. And I want you to remember that your generosity leaves us humble and profoundly grateful. So, good evening from all of us at the Cosmosphere. And as we watch this together, may God bless each of you. And may God bless America.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning was the first day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning was the second day.
God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.